A million times a million completely overwhelmed husbands have said, "My life was perfect until one day it wasn't." Like them, I thought my life was perfect until one day it wasn't. I am Blake Ramsey. At 31 years old, I was a happy and content man. Things were going well at this stage of life. I had a great job working on space projects in the startup aerospace division of a large aerospace company called Space Conquest, and I was making good money. We were working on a contract with NASA to develop the next generation manned spacecraft after the SpaceX, Dragon and Boeing Starliner. It was to be a winged spacecraft that would land like an airplane. Unlike the space shuttle, it would be designed for passengers only, 8 people. It looks a bit like the Air Force's X-37B, only bigger and with a canopy. Like the X-37B, it would land completely under automatic control, with no pilot input. My part of the project included a rescue system. In the event of an accident, each crew member was to be ejected in their own pressurized capsule. The ejection could be initiated at any stage of the flight, at launch and ascent, and at any point during re-entry. It was a space engineer's dream job. I had a beautiful wife of 7 years named Tracy and 3 beautiful children, a 7-year-old boy named Tyler and twin 6-year-old girls Beth and Emily. My wife and children were the center of my life, and I did my best to make sure my work didn't interfere with my time with my family. My parents were alive and well, as were Tracy's parents. Both parents lived an hour away from home and enjoyed visiting their grandchildren whenever they could. In addition, Tracy's married sister Lucy lived nearby. Tracy and I had a 4-bedroom house in an upper-middle-class neighborhood and great neighbors. Tyler had his own room and the twins shared a room. We kept the 4th bedroom for guests. Eventually, each girl would need her own bedroom. When that time came, we remodeled the basement into an apartment for the daughter-in-law. I met my beloved wife Tracy while attending college. Between my undergraduate and graduate degrees, I served 4 years in the Marine Corps to qualify for veterans' educational benefits. She was a freshman in college, and we quickly fell in love with each other. We were married a month after she graduated. I earned a degree in aerospace engineering and found a great job. When Tracy graduated, she went to work at a law firm as a paralegal. Tracy quit after 2 years when she gave birth to our son Tyler. Just 1 year later, Tracy gave birth to our twin daughters. Our life was perfect until Beth and Emily went to kindergarten. When all the kids went to school, Tracy went back to work at the law firm. I should have seen this coming, but I was blinded by my belief in my wife's total faithfulness. I thought she loved me as much as I loved her. Looking back, I can see that all the signs were there. Tracy began to dress more provocatively. Our sex life went from frequent to much less frequent. Tracy started working more, and when I asked her how much time she spent at work, she waved it off. When I asked her about the lack of quality time with me and our children, she told me she was working for a senior partner. She told me, this is a great opportunity for her career and will help us financially in the future. I had met her boss, Stanley Cross, several times before that day. At several social events and at the company Christmas party. He was the senior partner who founded the law firm that bore his name, Stanley Cross and Associates, Attorneys at Law. As far as I was concerned, he was an asshole. He was arrogant and disrespectful to me. I immediately distrusted him. The few times I'd stopped by Tracy's office to take her to lunch, Cross seemed possessive and only reluctantly let her out of the office. I had been following the romantic relationship between Tracy and her boss. If there was one, I didn't pay attention to it. It all went downhill just as the twins were finishing kindergarten. After the last day of school, Tyler, Beth, and Emily were going to spend the weekend with my parents. I was looking forward to a good weekend with Tracy to try to rekindle our relationship and love life. I picked up the kids from school and drove them to my parents' house, and then came home to have dinner and a movie alone with Tracy, as I had planned. When I walked into the kitchen, Tracy was already coming down the stairs. She had done her makeup for a night on the town. She looked really good. "Wow, baby, you look amazing. If you had told me we were going on a date, I would have rushed home. Give me a few minutes to wash and change, and I'll be ready to go out. Where are we going? A smirk appeared on Tracy's face, which didn't suit her at all. She emphasized the we, aren't going anywhere. I am, however, going to go somewhere, just not with you. I was shocked. What are you saying? I have a date with my boss, Stanley Cross, and that's just the beginning. Starting today, we're going to have new rules. Stan is coming to pick me up to spend the night in town. I won't be home tonight or Saturday night. We have a room, a suite, downtown. I'll be back sometime Sunday afternoon. What the hell are you talking about? I shouted. You need to calm down and accept it. This is the way it's going to be. I'm leaving and I'll be home Sunday afternoon. Bullshit. If you think I'm going to put up with this, you're crazy. You're out the door and don't plan on coming back. No, Blake. I'm coming home to our house. We will remain husband and wife, and I will still live here just like you. You have to understand that I still love you, but I need a little more. If you insist on making things more complicated, you are the one who will no longer live here. It would be a disgrace for the father of our children to be left penniless and in jail. Now you need to sit down with me and tell me about the changes that have taken place and that you will have to get used to. I want to do it the easy way, before Stan gets here in about 30 minutes. If he has to explain everything to you, you'll like it even less. I replied, if asshole is here in 30 minutes, he's going to get his ass kicked in 31 minutes. You won't want to do that, Blake, Tracy replied confidently. For two reasons. One, you'll really have to listen to what he says about what he can do to you if you don't cooperate. And two, he'll have Max with him. Max is his driver and bodyguard. He's big and mean and has no sense of humor. If you touch Stan, you'll end up in the hospital. I suddenly had a feeling I hadn't experienced since I was a Marine in the Middle East. I didn't define it at first, but then it came to me. I was ambushed. On one side of me is my wife, and on the other is Stanley Cross. I'll find myself in their crossfire. They seem to have the advantage of a pre-planned surprise, and I'm at a loss as to how to defend myself. I squeeze past Tracy and start to climb the stairs. Where are you going? Demanded Tracy. We need to talk. I'm going to wash up and change. I'll be down in 5 minutes. As a Marine in the Middle East, I'd been ambushed 3 times. I developed a few rules for ambush behavior. 1. Try to see it before you get trapped. In the case of Tracy and Stanley Cross, I didn't see it. The second rule is to take cover immediately. That's exactly what I did, walking out of the front room into the temporary safety of my bedroom. The third rule was, come up with a plan to extract yourself and your men. I needed a plan. I devised one. First, I changed out of my suit into casual pants and a sport shirt with a breast pocket. Then I set my iPhone to record and slipped it into my breast pocket. I then went to the dressing room and knelt in front of the old shoebox where my shoes stood. On the lid was printed, Captain BC. Ramsey, USMC. I swiped all the shoes off the locker lid and reached for the key I had taped to the back of the locker. I opened the shoe locker, and immediately a 10-year-old memory came over me as I saw my old uniform. A fleeting thought reminded me that I knew I could still comfortably fit into all my uniforms, even after putting them away for 10 years. Underneath the uniforms were several fold-out folders, and underneath them was a box containing my medals and awards for 2 tours of duty in the Middle East. I opened the box briefly, but I was interested in something else. Under the box of medals was the prize I was looking for. The Betsy, my Marine Corps Beretta 9mm pistol. It was in a fabric-lined plastic case with 2 magazines of 9 rounds each. I was not officially allowed to keep the pistol, but an accident that occurred in the quartermaster system during my discharge allowed me to do so. This pistol had a special meaning to me. It had saved my life in combat more than once. As I was loading a clip into the grip, I heard Tracy at the bottom of the stairs say, "Get your ass down here, Blake, or you'll be sorry." I replied, "I'll be right down. Get me a beer, will you?" I stood up and flipped the bolt to put a round in the chamber. Since the Beretta is a double-action semi-automatic pistol, I only needed to pull the trigger to fire. I slipped the gun behind my belt in the middle of my back and pulled my knit shirt over it. If I didn't look for it, it would go unnoticed. As I left the bedroom, I pulled my cell phone out of my shirt pocket, turned on the recording, and then put it back in my pocket so that the camera lens peeked out from behind the edge of the pocket. I wanted to know exactly what was on Tracy's mind and what plans she and that asshole had for me. I decided to adopt some of the interrogation techniques I'd learned in the Marines as part of my training. I was going to be as non-confrontational as possible and encourage her to talk so she could explain how she perceived the situation. When I arrived in the living room, I found Tracy sitting at the dining room table with a glass of white wine in front of her and a cold beer in place for me. "It's about time," she admonished me. "We have some things to take care of before Stan gets here." "Sounds like you have a lot to say, Tracy," I said. "Tell me about this new reality I have to accept." "First of all, I want you to remember that I love you more than anything in the world. I have a family with you, and I want to grow old and die in your arms." "I really don't want to hurt your feelings, honey," she started before I interrupted her. "No more weasel words, Tracy. I'm not sweetheart, I'm not honey, I'm not darling, and I'm not love. Just call me Blake, and I'll call you Tracy." Tracy seemed to take offense at my lack of endearment, but continued. "Again, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but as of tonight, circumstances have changed, and you have to accept those changes, or else. You should know that Stan and I have become very close since he made me his personal assistant. We've been having an affair for almost 7 months now. He started flirting with me shortly after I went back to work as a secretary. Then we got into the habit of having coffee together during breaks. When he made me his executive secretary, we started spending a lot more time together, and his flirting became more like seduction. It was easy to see what he wanted, and I was flattered that such a powerful and important man was showing interest in me. One day, after the end of the workday, when I was in his office, he made his move. "Obviously, you haven't thought about becoming an adulteress or making me a cuckold," I said. Tracy replied, "I'm sorry, Blake, but I haven't. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. You're still the person I want to spend the rest of my life with." I sipped my beer and said, "Good luck making that happen." "Tell me, Tracy," I continued, "why, after 7 months of successfully cheating and lying to me, did you decide to come clean? You could have gone on like this for years and I would never have known about it." We both decided we were tired of it. We wanted to be open enough to enjoy our relationship to the fullest. That meant we wanted to sleep together at night, go out and travel together as lovers. The only way to do that was to get you to accept the lifestyle we wanted. I sipped another beer and said, "Again, good luck making it happen." "No, no, Blake." Tracy leaned forward and tried to take my hands in hers. "There's not going to be a divorce. We're going to stay married. You just have to accept the fact that Stan and I will be seeing a lot of each other. I'll be staying overnight at his place at least 1 or 2 nights a week. Sometimes we'll vacation together on weekends, and sometimes I might go on an extended vacation with him to Europe or the Caribbean or something. Also, as his assistant, I will be traveling with Stan and meeting many important people. I will attend all his business meetings and accompany him to social events, such as dinners at the homes of his influential friends. Stan is paying me a lot of money. This will be good for us. Think of the benefits. Think of all the things we'll be able to afford. Vacations, our kids' college tuition. We'll finally be able to upgrade that lake house we've always talked about." I replied, "You think I'd want any of that paid for with money earned by a whore from Stanley's company?" "I'm not a whore," replied Tracy angrily. "I'm an asset to the company. I'm the confidant Stan needs to run his law firm. Entertaining is part of the business of a powerful and influential man. I am proud that such a great man has allowed me to be his mistress. And you should be proud too. Besides, this relationship probably won't last forever. I think it will last 2 or 3 years, no more. And then everything will be as before. I'll be your faithful wife again, and we'll enjoy our wonderful family together for the next 50 years. Besides, you should know that Stan wants to be your friend. He believes that I can be shared as long as he gets what he wants and you meet his requirements. He knows that I love you and still want you to make love to me. Stan even said you can have fun with me sometimes. There will just be some conditions. Since he'll be visiting us at our house occasionally, he really wants to become a family friend, maybe even become an attentive uncle to our children. Internally, I was furious, but maintained a relatively calm demeanor. I adamantly stated, "This jerk will never see or talk to my kids. Ever. Do you understand me correctly?" And then it hit me, and I had to ask, why would this asshole want to get close to my family? Doesn't he have a family of his own? Tracy replied, Stan is married to a beautiful girl who is almost 20 years younger than him. She comes from a very prominent family. In many ways, it was a marriage of convenience. But unfortunately, she is infertile and cannot have children. Maybe that asshole should adopt someone and stay out of other people's marriages, I stated. Stan really wants to have kids of his own, at least one. He wants a blood heir to whom he'll someday pass his law practice. He would prefer a son, but a daughter would be acceptable as well. Ideally, he'd like to have both. Then why doesn't the asshole use a surrogate? Then he can have as many kids as he wants, I reasoned. He talked to me about it. He told me that he really wants to be the father of a child or children, but he'd make a terrible dad. He wants any child he has to grow up in a loving family. Tracy then hung her head. Oh my God, I can't wait to hear this, I said, getting even more angry because I was amazed at what Tracy was saying. Then I realized what Tracy meant. He wants to impregnate you, doesn't he? And then he wants me to be a daddy to his baby out of wedlock. It wouldn't be an illegitimate child, Tracy stated adamantly. It would be my baby too, and I would love him, just like you do, because you love me. And his last name would be Cross. Stan would pay us a lot of money to raise the baby and take care of all the expenses until his son or daughter graduated from college. Oh shit, are you pregnant yet? I asked. No, she replied, but he wants me to stop taking the pill in a few months. I told him I want you to be okay with a new relationship before we do that. This just keeps getting better and better, I said to myself. And again I repeated, good luck making it happen. Tracy got angry. Stop saying that, she demanded. I know you feel that way now, Blake, but after some time has passed, we hope you'll change your mind. I was stunned by her words. Just as I stood up to confront her, the doorbell rang. Tracy ran to the door, letting her boss in. As she crossed the threshold, he wrapped one arm around her waist and they kissed. This just keeps getting better and better, I said to myself again. How did he take it? Asked Cross to Tracy. Not well. I think you need to explain the consequences of non-compliance, she said. I heard him reply, Then we'll move on to Plan B, shock and awe. Stan was an imposing man. My height was 5 feet 11 inches. He was a few inches taller and a little overweight. I wondered why Tracy admired his physique so much. I suppose his long, wavy graying hair gave him a solid appearance. He looked confident in his black three-piece suit, and he had an air of authority about him. His appearance and hard voice were appropriate for a courtroom. He stepped up close to me, even stepping into my personal space. Mr. Ramsey, I believe we need to talk. Talk? I need to kick your ass. You can try, and from the looks of you, I might be able to land a couple of good punches before my driver storms in here and kicks your ass. You'll be in jail by tonight, so get in. I looked out the door and saw a large man standing on the doorstep. It didn't scare me, but I wanted to hear what he had to say. So, muttering, I sat down. Great, now we can talk like civilized people. When your wife agreed to become my personal assistant, she took on other responsibilities as well. I have enjoyed your wife for the past 6 months, but we are tired of meeting in secret. You two will have a new relationship. As my personal assistant, she will provide me with professional and personal services as needed. Mr. Ramsey, you will remain Tracy's husband. Your role as husband and father will not change, with one exception. I will take care of Tracy's needs. Most of the time, those needs will be met at the hotel or at the office, but sometimes when you are not home, we will have to use your bed. You bastard. What makes you think I'm going to put up with this? I'm going to divorce her cheating ass before I put up with all this shit. Mr. Ramsey, this kind of talk is unproductive. Don't forget the business I'm in. I'm a big-time attorney with the power of the largest law firm in town. If you try to divorce her, you'll be punished. I don't just mean divorce. Of course, in a divorce, we will take everything away from you and make you pay her alimony and child support, and she will continue to have fun with me. Your wonderful little son and twin daughters that you cherish so much. You won't see them very often, if at all. You will be put in jail for a certain amount of time, and you will never see your children again. I'm sure your company will fire you on the spot. In addition, your family and friends will disown you. I sat stunned, not knowing what to say. I had no idea that Tracy and this jerk were willing to go this far to promote their blatant connections. Stan continued, "Now I know you won't do anything stupid. If you try to tell my wife, all the hell I just explained to you will fall on your head, plus a visit from my driver and his friends, after which you probably won't be able to walk, much less lay with a woman. If you try to just leave town, my private investigators will track you down. So be a good boy and just accept this new relationship. Your wife is a wonderful assistant." I turned to Tracy and asked, "Would you really do these things to me?" She replied, "I wouldn't want to, Blake, and I don't have to as long as you play ball. After a while, you'll see that this will become the norm for you, and you won't give these arrangements a second thought." Still stunned, I watched my wife and the jerk walk toward the door. He picked up her overnight bag and was almost out the door when I interrupted them. "Before you go, I want to tell you a few things." Annoyed and rolling his eyes in silent contempt, the asshole said, "What things exactly, and be quick about it?" I began. "After I have a couple drinks and pay for the death of my marriage, I'm going to call your wife and tell her everything you don't want her to hear." I then turned to Tracy. "Then I will call your sister, Lucy, and tell her all the same things. I'll let her tell your parents." Stan wasn't sure he understood me correctly because it went against everything he was used to when he was trying to commit extortion. "What did you say?" he asked. Without repeating myself, I continued. "Early Saturday morning, I'm going to call a locksmith and change all the locks." Now Tracy was listening and trying to comprehend what was happening. "After the locks are changed, I'm going to walk down the block to Kate's house and take her out for an evening of dinner, dancing and drinks. I never told you, but she's been shamelessly flirting with me, starting just a few months after her husband died. She may be a little older than me, and she doesn't have a movie star face like you, but she has an amazing body. She even modeled one of her bikinis for me. Until an hour ago, I wouldn't have thought of leaving you, Tracy, but things have changed, haven't they?" Tracy put on a hurt expression on her face and stammered, "Blake, you can't do that," I continued. "When you two come back Sunday afternoon, you'll find all of Tracy's stuff in the middle of the yard. It's everything she owns. All her clothes, shoes, personal items, makeup, jewelry, and even our wedding album. And it won't all be in plastic garbage bags. You should arrange to pick them up before 4 Monday morning, because that's when the automatic sprinklers go off." Stan began to boil. He turned red and clenched his fists because he couldn't believe that all his threats against me were worthless. Tracy's face took on a pained expression. "One last thing," I prepared to conclude my reprise. "I'm going to make an appointment with a divorce attorney on Monday morning. Not only am I going to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, but I'm going to name you, Stanley, as a co-defendant. In addition, I'm going to sue you for alienation of affection and another suit against your firm for violating your company's fraternity policy. I assume a company as large as yours has one. And even if those two lawsuits are dismissed, which is likely, they will publicly embarrass you and your firm and diminish you, Stanley, in the eyes of your colleagues." The asshole was furious. He threw the overnight bag against the wall and walked purposefully toward me, once again invading my personal space. He poked me hard in the chest with 2 fingers. It took all my self-control not to respond. "Listen, cuckold," he began. "You obviously have no idea who you're dealing with, or how ruthless I can be with someone I want to crush. I'm Stanley Cross. I run the largest law firm in the county. I could legally destroy you in a day. By the time Tracy and I get to our hotel, You'll be arrested on every charge. You may believe that if you're innocent, you can fight me. No, you won't. I've practiced law in this state for 30 years. I am personally acquainted with most of the top police officials, and I am friends with many of the attorneys in the DA's office. What's more, I've even entertained some of them. Most of the judges in this city either owe me favors or know that I have dirt on them. Even the politicians are on my side because I've often helped them get elected one way or another. Stanley was on a roll, and I didn't want to stop him. If you go for a walk with your friend Kate tomorrow night, the police will stop you and find a reason to search your car. There's a good chance they'll find drugs, and that's just the beginning. How long and how expensive will you have to fight these charges? You won't be able to find a lawyer anywhere who's willing to go up against me. You'll never recover. In the meantime, I'll still be entertaining your wife. Do you understand, cuckold? I totally believe everything you say, asshole. Stanley turned to me again. You need to show me more respect, cuckold. You should call me Sir or Mr. Cross. If you call me an asshole one more time, I'll have Max teach you some manners. Saying that, Cross tried to hit me, but I hit him first. I pushed him away and he collapsed on the couch. Tracy came to his aid. You goddamn son of a bitch! You're going to pay for this! I will destroy you! Remembering his bodyguard standing at the closed front door, he shouted, Max, come here! The front door immediately opened and Max walked in. He was big. He looked like a villain from some 1940s noir movie who doesn't know his own strength. Yes, Mr. Cross, he said. Cross pointed at me with his kind hand and said, Take care of him, Max. Yes, Mr. Cross, Max replied, and headed across the living room toward me. Tracy tried to protest, but Cross didn't bother to calm her down and waved her away. I had anticipated this kind of altercation when Tracy first mentioned that Cross would have his bodyguard with him, and I knew I might get a few insults from him. However, it was going to be bad. I stood my ground and watched, undefended, as Max brought his anvil-like hand up and launched it at my head. I absent-mindedly thought, can this blood be washed off, or will I have to buy new carpet? I was clearly in pain, and Max didn't know if he should keep hitting me. He turned to Cross for advice. Hit him, Max, is what he was told. I realized I couldn't take any more of this and stay conscious and sane. Max looked at me and asked if I could get up. I looked up at him and said, You hit like a girl. Now his ego was bruised in front of his employer. I watched as his right hand came up for another punch. You had to be there to see the surprised look on Max's face when I shot him in the leg. The explosion of the 9mm semi-automatic surprised more than just Max. The sound of the shot rang like a thunderclap in the confined room. I saw the look on Max's face change as he realized he'd gotten into a gunfight. He looked at me glumly and began fumbling in his coat pocket for his gun. I shouted, Don't do it, Max! And pointed the gun at him. There was another thunderclap and more smoke. I quickly crawled over to him, picked up the gun, and put it in my pocket. Then I said, How much respect do you think I have for you? Max shook his head left and right. That's right, Max. None, I said. Then I have no particular reason not to destroy you, do I? Max groaned. I have a family. I replied, Well, Max, I have a family too, and you didn't seem to have much respect for mine. Please, he pleaded. I looked over Max's shoulder and said, If I don't get you to a doctor within an hour or so, you'll probably disappear. And if I do get there, don't worry, those orthopedic doctors can fix anything with all the plastic and ceramic bone substitutes they make. Hopefully you won't have to learn to eat, write, and shoot a gun with your left hand. Max nodded that he understood. The mistake I had made was leaving the enemy at my back. The first thing that reminded me of that mistake was Tracy's warning. Blake, look out! I turned with my gun hand raised and saw Cross bring the fireplace poker down on my head. No doubt he would have destroyed me had my hand not protected my head. However, the poker struck my right forearm, and I knew from the pain that it was broken. From the force of the blow, I let go of the gun, and it fell to the floor. Cross's attention was drawn to the gun, now lying a few feet away from him. I snatched the gun with my left hand and pounced on it like a stink bug on shit. Now, asshole, where's your cell phone? I asked. Cross indicated it was in the left breast pocket of his coat. I pulled it out. Turn it on, asshole, I told him. He took it, and using his thumbprint, turned it on. Now, asshole, call your wife on FaceTime. Cross's eyes widened to the size of quarters, but he did what I told him. The phone rang through its destination a few times before a pretty woman answered. Stanley, why are you calling me at this hour? Who are you? The woman asked, seeing a face she didn't recognize. Mrs. Cross, I said. My name is Blake Ramsey. You don't know me, but you may know my wife Tracy Ramsey. She is your husband's personal assistant. Mrs. Cross replied, Yes, I know Tracy. She is a very nice woman. What on earth is that about? Why do you have that face, and where is my husband? I'm sitting on your husband, Mrs. Cross, and I have a gun. I turned the phone so that I could show her husband's face. Oh my God! She screamed into the receiver. Don't touch him! Look, Mrs. Cross, I don't have much time. You must know that my wife and your husband have been entertaining each other for the last 6 or 7 months. Today they told me they were going to go to a hotel for the weekend. When I disagreed with that, your husband asked Max to process me. Unfortunately for Max, I had to destroy him, and now I'm going to destroy your husband. My husband is supposed to be at our desert home in Palm Springs this weekend, working on a case he is scheduled to present in court next week. He lied to you, Mrs. Cross. He's here on the floor of my house right now. Oh, and this is my wife, Tracy. I turned the phone so Mrs. Cross could see my wife sitting on the couch with her palms on her cheeks and a frightened expression on her face. As you can see, Mrs. Cross, my wife is willing to spend a night on the town with your husband before they head to the hotel he has booked for tonight and Saturday. Mrs. Cross replied, I can't believe this is happening. I was surprised too, I said. I finished. I have to hang up the phone, Mrs. Cross. The police will be here shortly. It was nice talking to you. I tossed the phone to the floor and turned my attention back to Cross. Well, asshole, looks like your wife is now vaguely aware of your extracurricular activities. What were you going to do if I told her anything? Oh yeah, you were going to ask Max and a few of his friends to visit me, after which I'd be crippled and washed up. Glancing over to Max, I said, Max probably won't be able to do this job for a while. Then, motioning to Cross, I said, Listen up, asshole. If you send anyone after me, I'll destroy them. I'll destroy them all. And then I'll come after you. Is that clear? Asshole? Cross nodded his head affirmatively. At that moment, I smelled something foul, like shit. I looked at Cross. Did you just shit in your pants? I laughed. I looked at Tracy. Bring me my briefcase, please, babe. Nervously, Tracy picked up my briefcase from where I had left it when I first got home. When she set it down next to me, I opened it and pulled out my laptop. Is this the same computer you were going to shit on, asshole? Cross looked at the computer but didn't say anything. I turned the laptop over so I could see the bottom of it and reveal the hard drive. Then I placed it next to Cross's head and fired 2 bullets into it. The explosion from my gun surprised everyone again, and again the room smelled like smoke. I leaned over to his right ear and said, Try loading that computer with something now, asshole. Once in the kitchen, I pulled out my cell phone. It was still recording. I pointed it at my face as the last % of power drained out of the battery. I looked at the phone and said to myself, I can't let the police get their hands on that recording. If they do, and Cross has as much influence over the police as he says he does, I can imagine the tape being erased. I had to hide it. I quickly opened the bottom kitchen drawer to the right of the sink and put the phone in the folds of a stack of clean dish towels. There was little chance of it being accidentally discovered there. Finally, I wet a towel with water and wiped my face. My eye was badly swollen shut, and I couldn't see anything anymore, not even shadows. And my head hurt. I wondered if I had a concussion. I was only gone for a minute, and when I re-entered the living room, everyone was in their seats. Everyone stay where you are until the police arrive. They should be here in a few minutes. I think an ambulance will be just around the corner. With those words, I stepped out onto the porch. The first thing I saw were several of my neighbors lined up on the sidewalk. One of them said, "Were those the shots we heard, Blake?" I replied, "Yes, those were gunshots." "Did anyone call 911? Two people raised their hands. One of my neighbors was retired Marine Colonel Orson Sage. We were best friends and often drank beer together. I always called him Colonel and he called me Captain." "Are you wounded, Captain?" the Colonel asked. "You should see the other guys," I replied. In the distance, I could hear the howling of sirens. I knew the police would be here in a few minutes. "Colonel," I called out, "could you do me a favor? I need some help." "Sure, Captain," he replied, and stepped off the sidewalk onto my porch steps. "First of all, help me unload my weapons and put them on the table by the porch. I don't want to be seen waving one of these around when the police pull up." The Colonel took the gun I had taken from my hands, which I pulled from my pocket. He quickly removed the clip from the Betsy, refilled, and the cartridge from the chamber and placed them on the table. Then he unloaded Max's revolver and placed the pistol and cartridges next to the semi-automatic. Kate, a widowed neighbor from up the street, saw that I was badly beaten and came over, intending to help me. While they were both there, I turned to the Colonel and said, "I wish I had time to explain everything to you, but I have none. You should know that I had a fight with my wife's boyfriend. He's a high-ranking lawyer and he threatened to stuff my car with drugs and then let the cops arrest me." I handed the Colonel my keys. "Would you be so kind as to, after this circus is over late tonight, and if they haven't taped the garage with crime scene tape, take my car and hide it for me. The code on the garage door is the same number as my street address." "Will do, Captain," he replied. Kate interjected into the conversation. "You don't look well, Blake." "My head is starting to hurt and dizzy," I replied. "Maybe I got hit harder than I thought." Kate helped me sit down on the porch steps just as two police cars with red and blue flashers and blaring sirens pulled up. They made their way through the neighbors, who were mostly standing on the sidewalk and across the street. They approached the house, keeping their guns at the ready. The Colonel assured them there was no danger and pointed to the unloaded shotguns on a table by the porch. They asked if anyone was inside, and I said yes, there were 3 people in there, one of whom was wounded and needed medical attention. One of the police officers looked at me and said, "It looks like you need medical attention too." At this time, 2 ambulances arrived on the scene. They also had their lights flashing and sirens blaring. Immediately, 2 or 3 emergency medical technicians got out of their vehicles, crossed the yard and went up onto the porch. One of the police officers inside the house came out to meet them and told them there was a man in the living room with 2 gunshot wounds. The technicians disappeared into the house to do their job. Meanwhile, my head was starting to spin faster and faster. Kate told me to lie down. One of the medics hovered over me and began examining my face. I told him that I thought my right forearm was broken. I wasn't semi-conscious until some time later when the medics carried Max out on a stretcher. I vaguely remember Cross being helped to the ambulance with his coat wrapped around his waist. The female officer then led Tracy out of the house and toward the police car. She stopped suddenly when she saw me lying on the porch with 2 paramedics tending to me. She was crying. The sight of my face must have made her stop and pull away from the attendants. "Blake, I'm so sorry. I'm really, really sorry. This is not what I wanted," she wailed. "I didn't mean for you to get hurt." She tried to lean over to touch me, but I raised my hand and pushed her away. "Go to hell, Tracy," was all I said. Then her handmaiden picked her up and pulled her toward the police car. I don't know if I passed out or if the medic gave me something to ease the pain. Whatever happened, I was out for 3 days. When I first woke up, my vision was blurry, but I was looking into the eyes of an angel in white. When my vision cleared a little, I noticed that it was actually a 60-year-old angel, but she was still beautiful. "Mr. Blake, can you hear me?" she said. "I'm so glad you're back with us. I must be in the hospital, I said. Yes, she replied. You're in Mercy General Hospital in Midtown. You have been asleep for 3 days. 3 days, exclaimed I, coming to my senses a little. Yes, that long. I'll get the doctor now. He'll explain everything to you. Just relax. By the way, my name is Rose. While I was alone in the room, I began to assess myself. My right forearm was in a cast that went from my elbow to my wrist. With my good hand, I felt my face. There was gauze and tape over my left eye and nose. Touching my eye or nose was painful. Barring injuries to my head and arm, I seemed to be fine. However, I was hooked up to several machines that beeped regularly. One machine was giving me a saline drip. Looking under the blanket, I noticed I was connected to a catheter. Finally, I had a blood pressure sleeve on my arm that was inflating and deflating regularly. When I finished analyzing myself, Rose reappeared with the doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. York. In shorthand, he described my condition. I had a simple fracture of my right forearm, a broken nose that probably wouldn't be too disfigured, Dr. Humor, and my eye was black and blue and swollen. It would all heal. I was kept under sedation for 3 days because, in his opinion, I had a minor concussion and he wanted my brain to rest. Since I woke up already late in the evening, he decided to give me something to make me sleep until morning. Within minutes, I was out and about. When I woke up in the morning, I was in for a surprise. My left wrist was handcuffed to the bed rail. What the devil? I exclaimed when I realized what it was and pulled on it. Relax, Mr. Ramsey, said the voice. Looking around the room, I saw a middle-aged man in a suit with a loose tie. I was told you were about to wake up, he said. What's going on? Why am I handcuffed to a hospital bed? I don't think it's because you were afraid I'd fall out. I'm Detective Sergeant Hardman, the man said. And no, Mr. Ramsey, we weren't worried about you falling out of bed. We were worried that you might run away. Run away? Does it look like I'm in a position to run anywhere? And why would I even want to run away? You're handcuffed because you're under arrest. What? I exclaimed again. Yes, you're under arrest for assault with intent to commit murder, assault with a deadly weapon, assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and a number of less serious charges such as unlawful discharge of a firearm. Later today, after being seen by a doctor, you will be moved to a secure room on the 3rd floor. At that time, your handcuffs will be removed. And where did all these charges come from? I demanded. The original complaint was filed by Mr. Stanley Cross on his own behalf of Mr. Max Angel and your wife Tracy Ramsey. I should have known, I said to myself. Before we continue, said the detective, I must read you your Miranda rights. The detective obediently read me my rights and then left the room. A few minutes later, Rose came into my room. She was silent as she gathered my statistics. Did you know about this, Rose? I said, and raised my hand to make the handcuffs jingle. Yes, Mr. Ramsey, she replied. I'm very sorry. None of this is true, Rose. Believe me, and I'll take you out to dinner when it's over. Then I'll believe you. It better be a 5-star restaurant, she joked. A few hours later, Dr. York came to see me. He basically said it would heal with time. Then he said that I would soon be moved to another room and have a different doctor. Shortly after that, Detective Hardman came back with several orderlies. I was wheeled up to the 3rd floor, wheeled past a uniformed police officer standing guard at the guarded entrance, and wheeled into a small private room. The handcuffs were removed as unnecessary, as the room had a lock on the outside of the door, and I was reconnected to the hospital machines. Before leaving, the detective told me that in a few days, when I was feeling better, I would appear in court and before a judge on closed-circuit television where I could enter a guilty plea. He asked if I had an attorney, and I said I did not. He said he would send a representative from the public defender's office for an initial interview, and after that I could decide what to do. In my spare time, I reflected on how quickly my life had taken a right angle. I mourned the loss of my wife so suddenly, and at night I cried over the instantaneous dissolution of my marriage. Then my thoughts turned to my children. Where have they been? What are they being told? Who is taking care of them? I also wanted to know how things were going with my job. I had been gone for 4 days, and I hadn't warned anyone that I wouldn't be back right away. The doctors, nurses, and orderlies on the ward could not answer any of my questions. On my 5th day in the hospital, I received a visit from the public defender's office. It was a young attorney named Sam Wilton, who was just beginning to learn criminal law. He had familiarized himself with my case as he understood it, and he had a lot of information for me. First of all, he listed a list of charges against me. These were essentially the same charges that the detective outlined. It was helpful for me to get a copy of the charges in writing. He then informed me that I would be arraigned the next morning at 10 o'clock. M. He wanted to know how I was going to plead guilty. Before I could respond, he said that if I agreed to plead guilty to most of the minor charges, he could negotiate with the district attorney's office. I interrupted him halfway through to say that I was not guilty of any of the charges. I asked about my children. Apparently, after my wife gave her statement to the police, she was released. Her sister, Lucy, picked her up and she lived with my sister-in-law and her husband until the day the crime scene investigators allowed our house to be boarded up. My children were told nothing about me except that I was going to be away from the family for a long time. As for my job, I gave Sam my company's contact information and asked him to explain to my boss what had happened. Rereading the charges against me, I noted that some of the things the detective said didn't impress me enough. "What is this spousal abuse charge?" I asked. Sam told me that Stanley Cross had added that to his complaint after Tracy claimed that I had hit her several times. In fact, Sam had pictures of all the injuries each person had sustained. Among them were several photos of Tracy's face with a pronounced black and blue bruise on her left cheek and a purple bruise on the top of her left forearm. "I didn't do that to her," I said. "I never touched her." As I looked at Sam's face, I noticed that he had an expression that said he didn't believe me. At that moment, I decided that I wasn't going to give him any explanation as to what had really happened. I didn't really know if Cross's influence extended to the public defender's office. I didn't want to take any chances. Sam shared his perspective on my case. He said I had 3 witnesses who were going to swear to their version of events. The evidence seemed to support their version. He hinted to me that he might be able to convince the district attorney to accept a plea bargain if I admitted to 2 or 3 lesser charges at the arraignment. He said the DA would be happy to close my case, without spending a lot of energy on it. But, he added, if I plead guilty, I would still face civil charges by all 3 witnesses. To be convicted of what I was accused of was unthinkable to me. If I had been found guilty of most of the charges in civil court, I could have been raped, and financially. There was no way I would have agreed to a guilty plea or a plea bargain. "Sam," I said, "you have to plead not guilty at the hearing." "All right, Mr. Ramsey," he replied, "but you should know that after you're accused of shooting someone, you'll have to post bail. Even though you haven't confessed to it, the evidence the district attorney's office has could easily prove that you were the shooter." "I appreciate everything you're trying to do for me, Sam. I'm guessing from your tone that you think I'm probably guilty. However, I'm not." I didn't bother to tell Sam that I might have a videotape that would prove that I was guilty of self-defense only. I didn't want the fact that I had any evidence at all to get to the district attorney, or much less Stanley Cross. Instead, I told Sam that I needed him to contact my attorney. I didn't really have an attorney. I had an uncle who had spent his entire career in the Navy Judge Advocate Staff Corps and was now retired. He went from defense counsel when he was a junior officer to prosecutor judge and the office of Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Navy. After retiring with the rank of captain, he moved to the San Francisco area, passed the California bar exam, and then joined a family practice law firm. When he retired, he used his experience and knowledge as a volunteer child advocate in the court system. My uncle's name was Jonathan Allen Carter, but everyone used his initials, Jack, and referred to him as Jack, or Uncle Jack, as in my case. Since I didn't have Uncle Jack's contact information handy, I gave his name and what I could remember and asked Sam to make some inquiries about him. Sam was not to tell anyone else about my attempt to contact Uncle Jack. He was only to tell Uncle Jack that I was in serious legal trouble, give him a list of the charges against me, and tell him that I had pleaded not guilty and that I needed his help. Sam contacted me late that night. He said that my uncle would be at my house the day after tomorrow. He also informed me that Uncle Jake had told me not to talk to anyone about my case. All I had to say at the trial was, not guilty. The next day, I was arraigned in the courtroom, which was televised from the hospital. Apparently, many people had been through a similar trial before, as the hospital ward had a room set up for such cases. As expected, the charges were read out. I was asked how I felt about each one of them, to which I replied, not guilty. The prosecutor asked that I be remanded in custody without bail because I was dangerous. The judge stated that my doctors felt I should stay in the hospital for 2 more days, and then I would be transferred to the county jail to await a hearing. At the hearing, the judge was to decide whether to put me on trial. The day before I was to be transferred to the county jail, my Uncle Jake showed up. He drew up the paperwork to officially represent me and got permission to visit me in the hospital. I had never been so happy to see a friendly face in my life. I hugged him and cried a little. Until that moment, I didn't realize what I was going through. After a brief reunion, Uncle Jake got down to business. First, he asked for a private room where we could talk privately. Then he touched on a few household topics that he felt I should know. He spoke briefly with Lucy. He knew her casually as a member of the family. Most importantly, he told me that my children were fine. Tracy and my children would be staying with Lucy and her family for the time being, at least until the police cleared the house for occupancy. Lucy was confused. Tracy had given Lucy her version of what had happened and listed the charges against me, but Lucy had known me all my married life and found it hard to believe everything that was said about me. She was glad that Uncle Jake was here to help me. Next, Uncle Jake wanted to know exactly what had happened to put me in the position I was in. In a very whispered conversation, I told Uncle Jake what really happened. He shook his head and said it was an unbelievable story. I went on to tell him that sometime after my arrest, Stanley Cross, Max Engel, and my wife conspired to come up with an alternate version of what had happened that evening. In even more of a whisper, I told Uncle Jack that I had a videotape of the entire event on my iPhone. He didn't show any emotion, but I think he was relieved to know that there might be solid evidence to back up my story. The only downside to this revelation was that my phone was hidden in a drawer in the kitchen of my house. Uncle Jake assured me that he would be my guardian angel during this whole ordeal. He said that my only task now was to get well. In the meantime, he was going to study the case against me in detail and develop a defense strategy. He was also going to find out if I could be bailed out. I was to wait for a few days and he would contact me. I asked him to make inquiries about my children if possible. He assured me that he seemed to have a good relationship with Lucy and would work with her on this. I was discharged from the city hospital and transferred to the city jail. For 3 days, I heard nothing from Uncle Jack. Finally, I was brought before the judge. Uncle Jacques was there. Apparently, Uncle Jacques had made it appear that I deserved to be released on bail. However, I was under house arrest. During his absence, Uncle Jake rented a townhouse in a gated community. It was to be my new place of residence. Uncle Jake also lived there. I couldn't leave the small area of the gated community. Uncle Jake had many things to do. He didn't tell me about them, at least not until they were resolved one way or another. He had hired a private investigative agency to help him, and they were working on several leads. The most difficult task was finding my cell phone hidden in the kitchen table drawer. I was sure I couldn't do it, as I had a restraining order against me, preventing me from being away from my home, wife, and children. There was no way Uncle Jake would dare break into the house to get it back. He knew he would find a way sooner or later, but for now, there was no such opportunity. In the meantime, Uncle Jake had set up a new cell phone account for himself and me, so at least I had a way to call someone in case of need. One of the people I called was my neighbor, the Colonel. I told him about my situation and my situation. He said there were some things going on at the house that I might want to know about. When I told Uncle Jack about it, he asked me to invite the Colonel over for a few beers and steaks at the barbecue. The Colonel told us that one evening, about a week after the incident, and before the house was returned to Tracy, he heard his brown Labrador Semper barking at something outside. From his window, he looked across the street to my driveway and noticed two men in dark clothing surreptitiously shining a flashlight on the front door of the garage. He called 911 and reported a possible break-in. He then quickly dressed and, carrying his dog and an aluminum bat, crossed the street to confront the intruders. The intruders did not see or hear him approach until he stood behind them and they attempted to pick the garage door lock. "You picked the wrong neighborhood to rob," he said. When the robbers turned around, the Colonel took a picture of them. They were wearing hoods that would prove to any skeptics that they were indeed intruders. The would-be bandits jumped back at first, but immediately realized the Colonel was alone. "You'd better get out of here, old man," one of them said, and stepped toward him threateningly. The Colonel's brown lab couldn't be seen well in the darkness, but her menacing growl was heard by the bandits as she stepped between the Colonel and the bad guys and bared her teeth. In addition, the Colonel raised his bat and stood in the batter's stance, preparing to field the pitched ball. The second of the two thieves said, "Let's get out of here." They then fled down the driveway and got into a black SUV that was parked a few houses down the block. The Colonel followed them into the street and watched them drive away. He noticed that the license plate was smudged. A few minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up and the Colonel was waiting for them in it. They noticed that there was crime scene tape hanging on the door of the house. He briefed the officers on what had happened, and after a half-hour inspection of the premises, they wrote a report and left. I remembered that Cross had threatened to plant drugs in my car and then have me searched on an anonymous tip or at his behest if he was as influential in the police force as he claimed. So I was happy that I had gotten the Colonel to move my car to a safe location, unknown to my wife or Cross. As if that story wasn't enough, the Colonel had another one. 2 days after Tracy was allowed back into the house, the Colonel noticed a black SUV parked in front of my house. As he continued to watch, he noticed two men talking to Tracy in front of the open garage door. Judging by the hand gestures, Tracy was pointing to the empty stall where my car is usually parked. After a few minutes of animated conversation, Tracy and her guests went inside. The men left after about 45 minutes. However, they had no sooner left than the Colonel transcribed the license plate number of the black SUV they had arrived in. Uncle Jake checked the plate number against one of his sources and found that it was registered to a company called Unique Services. Upon further investigation, he found out that Unique Services was registered as a private investigation company. Unique Services employed only Jose Gonzalez and Miguel Ortego. Further investigation revealed that they both worked as police officers in different cities. Jose was asked to resign after a question about the theft of evidence from the police evidence locker. Miguel was fired for falsifying arrest records. Furthermore, Unique Services had the law firm of Stanley Cross as a client. Now it became paramount to retrieve my cell phone from the kitchen of the house. That's what Uncle Jake was going to do. His plan was to call Tracy and ask if he could come over and talk to her directly and informally about the situation. He explained that he wanted to help me and her at the same time by dropping many of the charges and settling a number of issues that would improve the situation for everyone involved. Tracy knew Uncle Jacques as he was a family member, and they often met at family gatherings. Nevertheless, she regarded his intentions with some suspicion and said she would call him back. The next day, she called him back, and they arranged to meet in the evening at 6 o'clock. At the same time, she added that her attorney insisted that one of his assistants attend the meeting as well. Uncle Jake readily agreed to this condition. Uncle Jacques told me everything that had happened. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, he rang the doorbell at my house. Tracy answered it quickly and invited him in. He said he was glad to see her again, and they even hugged for a minute. Tracy was dressed very modestly in a knee-length skirt and white blouse, and her hair was gathered in a ponytail. Once inside, Uncle Jake noticed a young man in a suit and tie and introduced him to Gordon Merritt. He was an associate in the law firm of Stanley Cross. They shook hands. The three of them settled into the large family room, and Tracy, apologizing, said she would bring them coffee. Once they were seated, Mr. Merritt suggested they get down to business. Before he did, he pulled out a tape recorder, placed it on the coffee table, and said he was going to record their conversation. Uncle Jake pulled out his recorder and placed it next to the attorney's recorder. Both lawyers smiled at each other. Uncle Jake started the conversation. "I'm very sorry that the situation has turned out this way for both you and Blake. You two have always been some of my favorite people and always seemed so in love with each other." "I'm sorry too, Uncle Jake. I never meant for things to get this far. I can't believe things got out of control," Tracy lamented. Jake continued as if he believed the charges against me were accurate and was skeptical of my version of events. "You probably know," Uncle Jake continued, "that he claims that you and Mr. Cross were having an affair, and when he saw Cross at the house ready to take you to a business meeting, he just couldn't take it anymore and got very angry. He even claims it all started with Mr. Cross's bodyguard." At this point, Attorney Merritt interjected into the conversation. "We think the evidence, both the testimony of the participants and the physical evidence, is fairly conclusive against Mr. Blake." "I think so too, Mr. Merritt," Uncle Jake replied. "So I'm asking you, if you can, to testify that perhaps Blake was not in his right mind at the time of the incident. In fact, he snapped because he was convinced that Mr. Cross was taking his wife away from him. You might point out that up until that point, Blake had always been the perfect husband, father, and provider." Merritt thought for a moment, then said, "We might consider something like that if Mr. Ramsey had pleaded guilty to the charges against him." Uncle Jake replied, "Do you mean all the charges? Or is there a way to dismiss or reduce some of the charges, or plead guilty?" "I'll have to consult Mr. Cross about that. He is very influential in the DA's office. Perhaps we can offer you an alternative solution that will relieve you of this problem. In the end, it would not only be best for Mr. Ramsey, but Mr. Cross doesn't like being in the middle of such a highly publicized lawsuit. It's bad for his reputation, and it's bad for business." "That's all I came for, Tracy. Thank you for having me. Blake wants you to tell the kids that he misses them and that he loves them." Tracy seemed to sympathize with that thought, and her eyes even clouded over a little. Before Uncle Jake turned off the recorder, he added another thought. "I hope you realize, Tracy, that if I prove that Blake's story is true, you will be prosecuted for perjury, obstruction of justice, and a number of other similar offenses, all of which are fraught with jail time." Gordon Merritt was about to say something when Uncle Jake turned to him. "And you, counselor, if I can prove that you knew your client and Mr. Cross were lying, you will also be prosecuted. Before you answer, I would like the two of you to discuss between yourselves what I have said." With those words, Uncle Jake took the recorder and stood up. "While you're talking, do you mind if I get myself some water?" "No, no, of course not, Uncle Jake. The kitchen is over there." And Tracy pointed to the door to the dining room. "There's some ice water in the refrigerator if you want it." Uncle Jake headed for the kitchen. Once there, he made sure he couldn't be seen from the family room. He opened the refrigerator noisily and then quickly went to the bottom right drawer by the sink. He stuck his hand into the stack of folded dish towels at the back of the drawer and fumbled for my iPhone. He quickly put it in his pocket, went back to the refrigerator, found some ice water, and poured himself a drink. About 2 minutes later, Uncle Jake returned to the family room. "Before I go, Tracy, is there anything you want to tell me?" Tracy glanced nervously at Gordon Merritt. Merritt spoke up for her. "We have nothing more to say right now, Mr. Carter. We'll let you know what we've come to in order to change the charges against Mr. Ramsey. And we will expect you to be obedient if you want this case to go away." Uncle Jake concluded by saying, "I can't ask for much more than that. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Tracy. I'll see you in court, Mr. Merritt." Uncle Jake didn't bring the iPhone to the townhouse. Instead, he arranged for Digital Analysis Solutions, DAS, to analyze the contents of the phone. Uncle Jake told the DAS director about the history of the case and the importance of video-audio recording to my defense. The DAS staff assured Uncle Jake that they understood the situation and would take care of it. They would call Uncle Jacques in a few days to let him know the results of their analysis. A few days later, Uncle Jacques and I were invited to the DAS office to review the results of the investigation. DAS transferred all the data from my iPhone to their own server. They actually found the video in question and made several copies of it. They actually made about a dozen copies and stored the files on DVDs, flash drives, and in the cloud. There was no way the video could have been lost, stolen, or taken out of circulation. Uncle Jacques and I watched the video for the first time. It was exactly what Uncle Jake was looking for. The audio tape recorded all of the conversations between Tracy, Cross, and me before the attack. Parts of the video were shifted when Max was working on me, but still, it showed me being attacked and defending myself. Some of the fuzzy parts of the video were hard to interpret, but the audio was clear enough to show what was happening. Fortunately, I had clear video of Max pointing his gun at me. We thought the briefing was over, but the DAS director told us there was more to it. In addition to everything that was on my cell phone before I recorded the event, photos, phone numbers, emails, texts, etc., I was sent 97 new emails that were not opened. Also discovered were 64 text messages that were sent to my phone after the video was recorded. DAS officials said they carefully analyzed all the new information on my phone without opening any files. Almost all of them were confirmed as coming from my friends, family, and acquaintances. However, one message turned out to be false. It was not received until a day after the incident and its origin. Could not be traced. DAS opened it on its server and found that it contained 27 photos. If I had opened the file, the photos would have been downloaded to my cell phone's photo files. When I destroyed my computer, I said, Cross couldn't download the photos there, so he tried to plant them in my cell phone. Uncle Jack and I thanked DAS warmly for their work on our behalf. He decided to leave my cell phone with them for now, but took a few copies of the videos with him. At home, we went over them again. Afterward, Uncle Jake became thoughtful. "What's bothering you, Uncle Jacques?" I asked. "I'm wondering how we should proceed," he replied. "If we took this evidence to the district attorney now, we could be pretty sure he would drop all charges against you. Besides, if he wanted to pursue the case, he might have a case against Cross, Max, and Tracy. More than likely, however, the district attorney would make it all go away, especially if Stanley Cross's influence is as strong as we suspect." "What's our other option?" I inquired. Uncle Jack replied thoughtfully, "We can leave it as it is until we get to the hearing. The prosecutor will undoubtedly call all the conspirators and let them tell their story. Then we will present our side of the story, and the DA will be forced to prosecute them all for conspiracy, perjury, obstruction of justice, and a host of lesser charges. That would be a lot of jail time. And I'd get my kids," I pondered. "So what do you want to do? We can end this tomorrow, or we can play the long game and involve them all in a complex conspiracy." I didn't hesitate. "Let's burn them all." "I was hoping you'd say that, Blake. I really want to put them all on trial for 2 reasons. First, I want to publicly expose them. Second, I've always been impressed with the way Perry Mason trapped a murderer using his own testimony. I think every trial lawyer would like to do that. That would be my Perry Mason moment." I thought it was funny that an old, battle-hardened lawyer like Uncle Jake would harbor such fanciful dreams. All that was left was to wait for the hearing, which was scheduled in 3 weeks. Uncle Jake used that time to prepare his presentation. One day he remarked to me that there might be a slight problem with admitting our video into evidence. If we told the prosecution what we had, they might make a motion to suppress the video. Uncle Jake decided not to say anything about our trump card until after the hearing. A week before the hearing, Uncle Jake took a leave of absence to return to his home in San Francisco, fulfill his obligations to the court, and spend some time with his family. It was at this time that I received a call from the guard at the gatehouse. "Mr. Ramsey," the guard began, "there's a woman standing at the gate who wants to see you. She says her name is Tracy Ramsey, and that she is your wife. Would you like me to let her through? I replied. Tell her to park for a minute and I'll let her know. Yes, sir, he replied. I immediately called Uncle Jack and explained what was going on. Blake, if she's here to talk, let's see what she has to say. Be polite and courteous. Don't touch her under any circumstances. I don't care how long it's been since you've been doing this. You don't have to worry, Uncle Jake. She's poison to me. Uncle Jake added, You know what you have to do, don't you? Yes, Uncle Jack, I do, I replied. After I finished talking to Uncle Jack, I called the security post and asked to be let through. In the few minutes I had before she knocked on the door, I cleaned up the townhouse. There were a lot of legal papers and notes on the dining room table, which I tossed on the bed. I gathered up the beer cans and cleaned up the kitchen, throwing everything in the dishwasher. Finally, I changed into Dockers and a knit sports shirt and combed my hair. Unfortunately, I hadn't had time to shave, and I had 3 days' worth of facial hair. I thought it gave me a stern look. As soon as Tracy knocked on the door, I opened it. My first impression was that she looked great. She had gone to a lot of trouble to dress for this meeting. She was wearing a knee-length red pleated skirt and a pink cashmere sweater that wasn't buttoned all the way up. Her hair was styled in a sloppy updo, and makeup was applied in moderation. Her lipstick and nails matched the color of her skirt. Please come in, Tracy, I said. It's good to see you again. You look great. Thank you, Blake, she replied. You look good too. In fact, you look very slim and pretty. I've had plenty of time to work out in the complex gym. Except for the occasional beer, I eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and avoid sugar, processed foods, and anything deep fried. I continued. Please take a seat on the couch and I'll get you a glass of white wine. I was ingenuous. Said I returned from the kitchen with a glass of white wine for Tracy and a glass of red wine for myself. Taking a few sips each, I asked why she wanted to see me. I know so much has happened between us, Blake, but I want you to know that I still love you as much as I ever did. I never, ever thought it would go this far. I replied, I know how much you wanted it to go away. You wanted me to become a cuckold and embrace the lifestyle you wanted with Cross. It seemed like it would be so easy. All you had to do was agree to me playing with Cross. I could have a wonderful time and still be your loving wife. And we could have made so much money. In a year or so, everything would be back to normal. I would have been yours alone for all eternity. I'm sorry I spoiled your plans, I said wryly. It wasn't my plans, she said. It was Cross's. He was sure he could intimidate you into submitting to his wishes. He had done it many times before, both professionally and socially. Neither he nor I expected you to resort to extreme physical measures. It was so unlike you. You were always so calm, malleable, and courteous. I guess that's why he thought I was a poofter, I suggested. Sit down. You don't know how afraid I was of you when I saw how cruel you were. It was a side of my character that I tried to suppress. I've hidden it for years, ever since I was a Marine in the Middle East. It's not who I am now. Out of the blue, Tracy asked, Where's your car? I grinned slightly and replied, I don't know exactly. When Cross said he was going to plant drugs in it, I took him seriously and moved it to a place where he couldn't find it. Speaking of my car, what were those two men doing in the house shortly after you got back? They seemed very interested in the garage and my missing car. Tracy reluctantly replied, I think they wanted to plant evidence in your car. I didn't want them to do it, but Stanley insisted we had to bury you. You don't seem to mind stacking evidence against me. Your whole story is going to land me in jail for a long time. If you love me like you say you do, just tell the truth, and the DA will drop the charges against me tomorrow. I can't do that, Blake. I'm in too deep. Stanley has such a bossy temper that no matter what he says, that's the way it's going to be. Guess I'm out of luck, I commented. Then it was my turn to ask a question. What is this accusation against me that I abused you? From the pictures I was shown, you had cuts and bruises on your face and arms. I never touched you. Tracy replied, It was Stanley's idea. As soon as you stepped out on the porch, an alternate scenario of what really happened popped into his head. He told Max and me what our story would be. The version he came up with was as follows. He came to the house to pick me up for a business dinner. You went into an irrational state and accused me and Stanley of having an affair. When Max heard the commotion, he entered the house to help me and Stanley, but you shot him before he could intervene. To make the story seem plausible, he punched me in the face several times before I could say anything. We've gotten together several times over the past few weeks to work our story out so there are no holes in it. I'm sorry, Blake, Tracy cried. I didn't want this to happen. I want things to go back to the way they were between you and me. Well, I said, that's not going to happen. There's a way out of this, Blake. Tracy seemed sincere. Stanley has made some inquiries about you. He knows you're a war hero. He also knows you've been diagnosed with severe PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty based on your PTSD history. He said he will use his influence with the district attorney and the court to get you admitted to a military veterans hospital where you can receive treatment. In a year, maybe less, you will be released as a recovered person. I'll be waiting for you, Blake. We could start over with our kids and live a long life together, just you, me, and the kids. So that was the real reason she came to talk to me. She wanted me to volunteer with the promise that Cross would help me get a minimum sentence in a veteran's mental institution. I didn't believe any of this, but I didn't bother to let Tracy know about it. Instead, I played along with her. That sounds good to me, Tracy, but you need to give me time to think about it. Besides, I'll need to talk to Uncle Jack. I think he might agree too. He seems to have so little evidence to help me compared to the testimony of you, Cross and Max. Please do this for yourself, Blake, Tracy added. Do it for you and me and the kids. In a few years, it will seem like it never happened. It'll just be a bump in the road. I doubt that, I said. You've been having fun with another man for months, wanted me to be a cuckold for your boss, threatened to take my kids away from me if I didn't play along, and made false accusations against me that will land me in jail for years to come. That's a big bump in the road. That's why I want you to take Stanley up on his offer. It's the easiest way out for all of us. Tears came to Tracy's eyes. Like I said, I'll think about it, I added one last time. We were done. I assumed it was time for her to leave. However, Tracy put her hand on mine and said, Maybe we could rest together for a few minutes. I've missed you in my bed. Is there any chance we can fall asleep together tonight and forget about what's going on around us, if only for a few hours? That's not going to happen, Tracy, I replied. It was obvious I was adamant, and Tracy took the hint. Please accept Stanley's offer, she said. I walked her to the door. Before she left, she gave me a hug. I think she meant it. It felt good, but I didn't return the hug. The purpose of the hearing was to determine whether I would be held for investigation. The prosecution was absolutely confident. Predictably, they put Cross, Max, and Tracy on the stand where they told their well-rehearsed versions of events. Uncle Jake asked each witness only one question. Do you swear to the truth of your testimony? Each of the three answered that they did. Uncle Jake wanted to burn Jose and Miguel and the three main witnesses, but trying to prove that they were complicit in trying to frame me was irrelevant to the specific charges against me. This was all the more true because all their attempts to frame me had failed. When the prosecution had calmed down, it was time for Uncle Jack to make his case. With the permission of the court, Uncle Jake began, the defense would like to introduce into evidence a videotape of the events in question. This evidence is exculpatory, Your Honor. Just then, the assistant prosecutor jumped in and said that this was new evidence that had not been presented to the prosecution for review. There was a reason for that, Uncle Jake explained. The defense fears that the district attorney and the court are biased against my client and will unfairly block our evidence. Do you have evidence that the district attorney is compromised, Mr. Carter? The judge asked. The evidence is on the video, Your Honor, Uncle Jake replied. Then you and the prosecution will retire to my chambers, where I will review the video and rule on its admissibility. The judge started to get up as Uncle Jake spoke. No, Your Honor, we're not going to do that. Why not? the judge asked. He was beginning to get angry that someone had disobeyed him in his court. Because, Your Honor, the defense doesn't believe the court is completely impartial, and we won't risk you deciding to suppress our evidence. Are you accusing the court of being corrupt, Mr. Carter? Possibly corrupt, Your Honor. Can you prove your assertion, Mr. Carter? Or is that proof also on the video? As a matter of fact, it is, Your Honor. However, I can give you an example of what I mean if you answer a few questions. Let me get this straight, Mr. Carter. You believe you can prove that the court is biased against your client by asking me a few questions. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Uncle Jake stated. Very well, Mr. Carter. Ask your questions. However, if you can't prove your point, we'll listen to the tape in chambers, and I'll decide if it's admissible. I will accept that, Your Honor, but you should know that if this videotape is ruled inadmissible for the purposes of this trial, and my client is convicted based on the testimony of the 3 prosecution witnesses, I will release the tape to the news stations and the internet regardless of what the court rules. Furthermore, the evidence in this video is such that your integrity will be called into question if you do not release it in court. I feel like I'm being threatened, Mr. Carter, the judge said. Without waiting for the judge to get even more angry, Uncle Jake asked, Your oldest son is in college, isn't he, Your Honor? He's attending the Air Force Academy, isn't he? Yes, the judge replied. He's a dually, a freshman. Appointments to the Air Force Academy are very competitive, aren't they? The judge replied that yes, they are. First, your son had to apply to the congressman from your district or senator. After that, he was scheduled for a civil service exam. Based on the results of that exam, he was assigned along with 9 other young men. He was sent to a nearby Air Force base where he underwent a medical examination, a physical fitness test, and aptitude tests as a pilot and navigator. In addition, he was required to take college entrance exams. Is all of that correct, Your Honor? Yes, the judge answered. He got an A- in high school and competed on the swim team every year. You're understandably very proud of him, Your Honor. State your point, Mr. Carter, the judge said. Your son's application packet also included 3 letters of recommendation, correct? Quite correct, Mr. Carter. Who were those letters from, Your Honor? Let's see. One was from his swim coach and one was from his math teacher. Who wrote the 3rd letter, Your Honor? The judge was silent for a minute, but finally spoke. Mr. Stanley Cross wrote my son a recommendation for admission to the Air Force Academy. Mr. Cross must have known your son very well, unless he made up a letter full of untruths, Uncle Jake stated. My son worked in Mr. Cross's office his sophomore and junior year of high school. He wants to be a lawyer someday. So Mr. Cross is a family friend? He's more of an acquaintance than a family friend, and my professional associate in some of the legal organizations I belong to. So now, Your Honor, you can imagine how the defense views your impartiality in this case. Uncle Jacques finished his inquisition. The judge answered him. You have placed me in a situation that calls into question my personal integrity, counselor. Let me assure you that any association I have with Mr. Cross will have no bearing on the decision-making process, but you have made it a matter of perception. The judge was silent for a moment, then looked up and said, Turn on the video, counselor. Uncle Jake ordered the bailiff to dim the courtroom lights and lower the 2 large projection screens on either side of the judge's bench. Uncle Jake looked at me and said, Showtime, Blake? He pressed the enter button and the video began to play. A whole action unfolded in front of the judge, the prosecution, and the courtroom audience. As Cross threatened me and said, I personally know most of the high-ranking police officials. I am friends with many of the attorneys in the DA's office. What's more, I've even had fun with some of them. There was a loud sigh from the prosecution bench. The assistant DA put her head down on the table and sobbed. We all stared at her for a few seconds before she got up, put the papers in her briefcase, stood up, and hurried out of the courtroom, still crying. Uncle Jake continued watching the video. Cross, Max, and Tracy all stood up together and tried to quietly leave the courtroom, but they were easily spotted. The judge explicitly told them to stay in their seats. The remaining ADAs watched the video to the end. The lead prosecutor quickly stood up when the video ended. It was obvious. He wanted to take a break, but before he could ask for one, Uncle Jake said, "I have another video." Without waiting for permission, Uncle Jake queued up the second video and explained that it had been taken 2 weeks earlier, at a time when my wife had come to visit me at my townhouse. He then pressed enter, and the video began to play. Tracy realized the full implications of that video. It showed her confessing everything that Cross had tried to do to me. She screamed, "Blake, how could you do this to me?" After the video scrolled for a few minutes, Cross also realized how damning it was. "You stupid bitch. You stupid, stupid bitch. You let him record you. What were you thinking?" he said aloud. Tracy had no idea that when she came to visit me, I had set my iPhone to record everything she said. The phone was on the coffee table in front of her, hidden by books and papers. I turned it on just before I opened the door to let her in. The ADA did ask for a recess to evaluate the new evidence. Uncle Jake handed the ADA copies of the videotapes on DVDs. The trial was adjourned until the next morning. When the court convened the next morning, 3 prosecution witnesses were strangely absent. Instead of the acting district attorney, this time the real district attorney for the county sat at the prosecution table. The judge gave him the opportunity to speak first. "I'll be brief, Your Honor," he began. "First, all charges against Mr. Ramsey are dismissed. We believe he acted in self-defense when he took action against Mr. Cross and Mr. Angel. It was pretty violent self-defense, but it was self-defense. Second, my office issued arrest warrants for Mr. Stanley Cross, Mr. Max Angel, and Mrs. Blake Ramsey for conspiracy to commit perjury, bribery of perjury, assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm, making false oral and written statements to police, filing false complaints, and obstruction of justice. In addition, my office was alerted that Mr. Cross was attempting to plant false evidence against Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Angel and Mrs. Ramsey were aware of this. We have also identified 2 suspects working for Mr. Cross who attempted to plant false evidence, and we are in the process of arresting them at this time." Stanley Cross, Max Angel, and my wife were arrested. They were eventually released on bail. The district attorney was furious at the news that his organization had been compromised by Stanley Cross over the years, and he set about ferreting out all of his colleagues who had anything to do with Stanley Cross. Eventually, all of the defendants were convicted. Stanley Cross was the only one who tried to defend himself by pleading not guilty. This was a mistake because both Max and Tracy pleaded guilty and testified against Cross. As a result, Stanley Cross was sentenced to 11 years in prison. Max was sentenced to 7 years. Tracy received a 5-year sentence. Jose and Miguel were arrested for attempted obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. The district attorney played one of the perpetrators against the other until Miguel broke down and confessed, hoping to get a lighter sentence from the judge. They both went to jail for a long time. Stanley Cross was held in the county until he was transferred to a state prison to serve his sentence. Max and Tracy, on the other hand, were given 2 weeks to get their affairs in order before they had to surrender to the sheriff and be taken into custody. Max spent that time preparing his family for 7 years without him. With any luck and good behavior, his lawyer told him he could be out on parole in 4 years. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.